Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to Shabbat Shalom to the people on live stream also. So in this week's Parsha, I have a lot going on in my head. I've been thinking about Rabbi Heschel. I've been thinking about Martin Luther King. I'm thinking about this week's Parsha, transition of power in our country, a transition in Israel. There's a lot going on. It's a great week for Rabbi Mark to decide to leave. So when we get to this Parsha, it's introduced that the transition between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus is a little abrupt. First, it's a list of people who came down to Egypt, and then it says, Joseph died, all of his brothers, and that whole generation. That book's over. Everyone there's dead. Here's a new book. The people, Israel, they grow in the land, and then, Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadat Yosef. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So, really, that era of our life is over. This is a new life. A king who did not know Joseph. Which the sages interpret to mean he intentionally forgot Joseph. But when we get to this, at this point, this Pharaoh is worried about the people becoming too numerous, decides to make them into a scapegoat, is at least how I read it. And first issues a command to throw the boys as they are born, issues a command to the midwives to throw the boys into the Nile. And the midwives were given two of their names, Shifra and Puah. The midwives disobey. And it's strange, they're called the Mialdot Ivriot, which it's not clear if that means that they are Hebrew midwives or midwives to the Hebrews who are Egyptian, right? It's strange because they give Pharaoh, when he confronts them, why didn't you throw the boys into the river? They give Pharaoh a pretty cockamamie response that's clearly an excuse, and he doesn't kill them. So that to me indicates that they must be Egyptian, because if they were Hebrew and they let the Hebrew boys live, he definitely would have had them killed. So that's, I think, something to note. Then what happens is Moshe is born, and that in itself is a bit of an act of rebellion. The Midrash tells us that the entire people had separated, couples had separated, because why give birth to children in this type of world, where all the boys are going to have to be slaughtered? And then they say it was Miriam's influence who convinced her parents to come back together and give birth. And then it's also another act of rebellion to place the child in a basket. And then Miriam follows, or it says Moses' sister, follows the baby down the river. And the next thing that we see is the daughter of Pharaoh coming down to bathe in the Nile. She sees the basket, asks her servant to fetch it. She opened it, saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This is a Hebrew child." So I'm just going to read the Hebrew. "Vatiftach v'tir'ehu et hayeled v'hine na'ar bocheh v'tachmol alav v'tomer mi'aldei ivrim zeh." So we open with the midwives refusing to obey Pharaoh's command and letting the boys live. And then the defiant assertion of life. And then the daughter of Pharaoh adopting who she knows to be a Hebrew child. And we don't know exactly how Pharaoh took this. I imagine he wasn't happy. Maybe it wasn't obvious that it was a Hebrew child, but it's certainly obvious that she was never pregnant. So that's really flagrant in his face. She knows it's a Hebrew child, and because v'tachmol alav, she had feeling toward it, she decides to raise this child. And then we have Moses. So the first probably 12 or 13 years of his life, though we're not sure how old he is, at least through his teen years in these two verses. Vayhi b'yamim hahem vayigdal Moshe. there was some time passed, and Moshe grew. Vayitze el Echav, he went out to his brothers, his kin. Vayar b'sivlotam, he saw their hardship. Vayar ish mitri makeh ish ivri me'echav, and he saw an Egyptian man hitting a Hebrew man, striking a Hebrew man from his kin. So he identifies with them as family. We don't know how he was raised. And then it again says that he grew. Well, after this, he said, "Vayifen cho vacho." He looked one way and another way. Vayar ki ein ish. He saw that there was no one. Vayachet hamitzri vayitmenehu vacho. And then he strikes the Egyptian and hides him in the sand. Okay. So what we have in this parsha is a few examples of like the first stirrings of rebellion or the first stirrings of resistance. And Moshe, as we know, grows into be our greatest leader, who is known as like the paradigm of all prophets. But the question I always have is, it's incredible that Shifra and Pua resisted Pharaoh. And maybe other midwives did too, we don't know. But why didn't everyone? And it's incredible that Yocheved and Amram decided to have another child, but why didn't everyone? And it's really, I think, stark that Moshe goes out, sees, well, that, let's say even before that, Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter, sees this child and has a deep feeling of compassion, but why only her? Why do we need a prophet to lead us into revolution or to liberation? The people, before they're freed, are in Egypt for a long time and are slaves for a long time. So I guess the question is, who is a prophet? Why do we need a prophet? And what happens when a prophet speaks? Really the question is, if all it took is for Bat Paro, well, first I'll say, sorry, my thoughts are a little bit scattered. I hope it's clear so far. Any questions on a clarity level and an alphabet level? Okay, give me like an affirmative no or yes.
No.
Okay, great. Okay. What it says about the midwives. Vayhi ki yaru hamyaldot et ha'elohim vayas lehem batim. The midwives feared God, or they had awe, reverence, they had a sense of God. The only other time that this has this phrase, or this concept of the reverence for God, the sense of God, has appeared so far, is at the Akedah when Abraham is about to slaughter Isaac. The angel stops him and says, "Now I know you are a Yoreh Elohim." That's who you are. And when Abraham believes that Sarah is going to be taken by the king, and he asks her to pretend to be his sister, he says, "I know that there's no fear of God here." So they have some sense that is of a power, of a awareness higher than the instruction of Pharaoh. And they're the first people that have this verb in an active form. Abraham is a Yoreh Elohim, but they're the first people who do it, who do something. So all it takes is this sense that there's something more important than what the leader tells you to do. And all it takes for Bat Paro to rescue this Hebrew child floating in the water is, says Vayachamol. She feels some sort of sense of compassion, some other feeling. Identification with the other. So, what stops us from accessing those things? If those are accessible to everyone. If I am contending that Shifra and Pua were exceptional because of the actions they took, but not exceptional in their potential, meaning any of us could have done that, what is it that stops us from listening to the prophetic call that we hear? So what stops us from taking prophetic action? So if you notice something going on, and you think you know what is right, and it might require you to say something or do something that puts you at risk, or that not other people are doing, what stops us? So I'm going to pause for a moment and ask for some responses.
Fear.
So Sarah says fear. What are we afraid of?
Fear of the reaction, fear of standing out, fear of the retaliation on you, your family, your people, whomever.
Okay, so fear of retaliation from the power structure on you or your family.
Right.
Fear of standing out, just even being different from other people is scary. And you don't know what the future will be. You know that in action, you know what will happen, which is what has been happening. So that's a safe option. Okay, there is risk, and there's fear associated with risk. What else stops us? Yes, yeah.
There's also the idea that if you're in a large group, maybe someone else will do it on your behalf.
Right. What's that called in psychology?
And there's that story in New York.
Oh, that's
What'd you say?
Kitty.
Right. The diffusion of responsibility. That's what it's called. People think that if no one has taken action, then either it's not socially acceptable to take action, or maybe somebody else will. But when it's not clear what to do, everyone's sort of frozen in action by other people's inaction, which is a form of conformity. We'll talk a little bit about conformity if I don't go over time. What else? Yes? Laziness. Okay.
I've been inert for so long that I'm used to inertia.
Right, so inertia. So not only do we weigh the risk against the benefit, we weigh the effort against the benefit. And if the effort doesn't match the benefit in our mind, then we're lazy. Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to approach it. I don't know. Which sort of paralyzes you.
Right. So I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if anything I did would be helpful. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe I'll do the wrong thing. I'm paralyzed by that. Yeah.
Doubt. Maybe I'm wrong.
If everyone else isn't doing something, why do I think I know what the right thing is? Right? So identifying what is the prophetic impulse within us, what is a genuine communication from the divine, is difficult. Because it almost always is going to be different than what other people are saying. And it's in general a good principle to be skeptical when we want to do something very different than other people. Okay, how do we know that this is the right thing? Especially people we trust. Okay, so I want to propose, I'm going to read some quotes from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. This is from a packet put out by the Shalom Center. This is 5 essays. I'm not going to read all 5. 5 essays selected by Dr. Susanna Heschel in commemoration of his 52nd yahrzeit. The knowledge of evil is something which the first man acquired. It was not something that prophets had to discover. He's talking about what is sin and what is a prophet. Their great contribution to humanity was the discovery of the evil of indifference. So that, just to pull that out a little bit, we're all able to tell the difference between bad and good, but the prophets had to point out to us the evil of inaction, the evil of indifference to evil. We remain neutral, impartial, not easily moved by the wrongs done to other people. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. It is more universal, more contagious, more dangerous. A silent justification makes possible an evil erupting as an exception becoming the rule and in turn being accepted. The prophet is a person who suffers the harm done to others. Wherever a crime is committed, it is as if the prophet were the victim and the prey. The prophet's angry words cry. The wrath of God is a lamentation. All prophecy is one great exclamation. God is not indifferent to evil. So the prophet is someone who feels the pain done to others. So how can you distinguish what is a genuine prophetic call? I want to propose, if it hurts to say, hurts to feel, and hurts to do, it's probably the right thing. What is right is very rarely easy. And I would even suggest that if it's easy, it's probably wrong. That's not always true. There are some good things that are easy. But especially when we're talking about dissent or defiance, we should not expect it to ever be comfortable. And anytime we encounter discomfort when we're stepping into a field of action where no one else has taken action, right? Moshe looked around and saw that nobody else was acting. We should expect it to be almost impossibly difficult. And so, one of the most important skills we can develop is knowing what to do when that discomfort arises. I want to distinguish two different types of dissent and two different types of discomfort. So, I think something that a lot of people are engaged in, a type of activism that a lot of people in this community are engaged in, is fighting anti-Semitism. So maybe that's, you're working with an organization, or you encounter something at work or at school, or you have an interaction with somebody and you want to counter that. That is an act of dissent against, I guess I would say, a hegemonic force. And that is an act of rebellion. But if you ask the people close to you, they would all support you in doing that. So that's one type of discomfort. It's uncomfortable to step into the public and take a stance that's unpopular in your own defense, right? But it's a different type of discomfort than when you have to step into dissent and the people around you don't support you. Can you step into dissent and take action when nobody around you is supporting you? When some voice inside you tells you that this is the right thing, and for some reason other people aren't speaking or acting, and I'm stepping into dissent not on my own defense, but on defense of the hurt done to other people. And I want to read another quote from Heschel. Dissent is indigenous to Judaism. The prophets of ancient Israel who rebelled against a religion that would merely serve the self-interest or survival of the people continue to stand out as inspiration and example of dissent to this very day. So there is a type of dissent that is in your own interest, and there's a type of dissent that is against your own interest. That if your highest priority was your own survival, it would be easier to do nothing. For example, if you benefit from a system that is doing harm to other people, it is to your advantage not to say anything. But it is also wrong. So to do the right thing is to do something that puts some value above the interest or survival of your own group. And that is to feel the pain of other people. And that, I think, is very difficult. And a type of discomfort that I think we all struggle with in a real way, and a way that I'm not even sure how to tell you how to get used to it. But that it is vitally important that we get used to it. The greatness of the prophets was in their ability to voice dissent and disagreements, not only with the beliefs of their pagan neighbors, but also with the cherished values and habits of their own people. What Heschel was focused on in the prophets was not the prophets speaking to the world and saying this is what God wants of the world, but speaking to the Jews and saying this is what God expects of the Jews, that you are not living up to your call. And it's hard to read and it's hard to hear. But when we do that, when we're able to voice or accept dissent, that's life-giving. It's very painful. But it's what we need to do. Every person, I think, has both a duty and a need to voice and accept dissent. Acts of dissent prove to be acts of renewal. It is of vital importance for religious people to voice and to appreciate dissent. And dissent implies self-examination, critique, discontent. What's interesting to me is that the three examples we get of dissent at the beginning of the Parsha are all from people in a privileged position. It starts with the midwives, who are Egyptians, I think. I mean, it's not clear, but who are Egyptians, and they decide to help out an oppressed group. And then the daughter of Pharaoh, which I can't imagine a more privileged position, taking a bold stance in his face. And then Moshe, who was raised, we think, partially with his mother and partially in the palace, going out to the people. So in a sense, why didn't other people rebel? There's a lot more risk to them. And I think we can understand that risk, that it's really hard to put yourself or your family at risk. And it maybe isn't a fair thing to ask. But it's incumbent upon people who have less risk upon them to feel the pain of others. And it's more difficult because it's against their own self-interest. Am I clear? I know I'm saying a lot of words. Okay. What else did I want to say here? I think so my main point is 2 points. There's a duty and a need of every religious person to both voice and accept dissent. And how can you tell when something is an authentic prophetic call? I think you have to pay attention to how painful it is. And the degree to which you can feel that pain and be able to sit with it, I think, is the degree to which you can step in with prophetic dissent. And I want to say throughout our history, Jews tend to view ourselves as if we have a reputation for holding dissent pretty well. And in some ways, we have been a model of that for the world. Certainly in our holy books, we care about disagreement. But we've not always done right by our dissenters. When thinkers and actors put forth a bold new way, sometimes they're killed for it. Maimonides' books were burned, and he was basically, in excommunication. The Hasidic movement, which brought a sense of religious renewal, I think that we still feel, was a movement of dissent, and they were also oppressed. And I want to say one of the biggest challenges of our generation is, do we feel like we are doing right by our dissenters? When we hear within the Jewish community a voice of dissent, do we sit with that discomfort so that we're able to hear it and that we're able to feel the pain of others that it is expressing? And I think that is going to be the deciding moral question of the next 20 years. Can we both voice and hear dissent? And again, I want to say it's not easy. So the second question I had was, what happens when a prophet speaks? What response can you expect if you do voice dissent? What are some responses you could expect? Ignore completely. Sure. People are like, who are you? Okay. I don't have to listen to you. Rejection. But what we said before, it could backfire. It's totally true that it could backfire. If we look at the end of this week's Parsha, the part that we read, when Moshe and Aaron go to Pharaoh, they make things worse. And then on the way out, the Israelite foremen who are in charge of making sure that the Jews meet their brick quota, they're in this heated board meeting with Pharaoh. where they're like, this is not possible, and he's like, you're lazy. And they're like, okay. So then they leave, and they run into Aaron and Moshe, and they're like, this was terrible. Why did you do this? We didn't need you at all. Everything's worse now. And then Moshe says, Adonai lama hareota la'am hazeh, lama zeh shalchtani. Why have you made things worse for this people, and why did you send me? This isn't working. Ume'az bati el paro ledaber bishmecha. From the moment I started to come to Pharaoh to try to speak in your voice, things have just gotten worse. And nothing's gotten better. And that's totally possible. And we also want to say that Moses didn't want this job. The Midrashic tradition has that he argued for a week till God basically forced him to take it. And he tries to go back like 3 other times. But that's not really an excuse. I think that's just a piece of dissent, is that it could backfire. And it's a part of being human that our efforts to step in might be met with rejection. But then our obligation in that moment is to hear that rejection and hear that critique, the dissent to our dissent. If we did something that hurt someone else, okay, then we have to integrate that and move forward. But we can't allow that to stop us from moving. So maybe I can end with a quote from Heschel. Is there dissent in Judaism today? Creative dissent is not simply repudiation or demur. Creative dissent comes out of love and faith, offering positive alternatives, a vision. The scarcity of creative dissent today may be explained by the absence of assets that make creative dissent possible. This is what makes it possible. Deep caring, concern, untrammeled radical thinking informed by rich learning, a degree of audacity and courage, and the power of the word. The dearth of people who are both rooted in Jewish learning and who think clearly and care deeply, who are endowed with both courage and the power of the word, may account for the spiritual vacuum for the state of religious existence today. So what happens when we don't listen to or accept the prophetic voice, when we're not able to sit with the discomfort of dissent? Judaism, whose true stance is audacity, is presented as a religion of complacency. Judaism is a call to grandeur. What we hear is a system of trivialities, commonplace, cliches. Okay, now the last thing I want to say, I'll close the book. Last thing I want to say is that Heschel also points out that what is once radical tends to become cliche. Once it's accepted, it stops making a demand on us, and we can just sort of repeat it as a phrase. At one point, declaring that black people and white people deserve to have the same rights was a radical thought that when white people heard it, it made a demand that they sacrifice something and that they become uncomfortable and that they feel the pain that black people felt. And now when we say that, it's easy to agree with and it demands nothing of us. Because you can say, I support equal rights for all people without saying, I have to give something up and I have to hurt. And that's a real risk. Both Martin Luther King's legacy and I think also Heschel's legacy have now become accepted. And they're now heroes. But in their day, they were radical. And really we have to understand that the Jewish establishment did not like Heschel. He was not popular, and everyone was angry at him all the time. And it's tempting to think that had I been there, I would have been on the side of the good, but I don't know. And some of you were there. Maybe you were on the side of the good. Maybe you did go down and march or whatever. But we have to embrace whatever voice now sounds radical to us, because without that, we only have cliches. And we can't really survive on that. And that doesn't do justice to the grandeur of the prophetic call. Thank you all. Shabbat Shalom.